All right, well, welcome. I really appreciate everyone being here. Um, this is week 10, and I thought before we got started, I would do the last of the interesting facts about Lewis. Oops, gotta get on my right screen. Lucy from the Chronicles of Narnia was a real person. She was Lucy Barfield. And Owen Barfield was one of the Inklings with J.R.R. Tolkien that used to drink beer with Lewis and talk about their work. So she was Lewis's goddaughter and the daughter of Owen Barfield. She was 4 years old when he started the book, writing The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and 14 when he finished it.
Mm.
So in his
Wow.
dedication book to Lucy, I guess the first edition, he wrote, "Someday you will be old enough to start reading fairy tales again. You can then take it down from some upper shelf, dust it, and tell me what you think of it."
Yeah.
And Lewis was always real big in saying that you read fairy tales when you're a kid, and you read kid stories, and then when he got to a certain age, he started reading them again because he just got a lot out of them. There's messages in a lot of mythology, a lot of stories that the author, whoever wrote it, had a lot of adult themes, I guess you might say, adult
Yeah,
messages.
because some of those fairy tales are scary. They're not,
Yeah.
I mean, Rapunzel is kind of repulsive. You know, I've been playing that with Lulu, and the witch
Yeah.
steals this baby and takes her off. And I'm like, that is not good.
Mary starts saying, "Why am I reading this to her?"
What is horrible. You know, and many of them they've changed. Disney, I think, has come through and changed them, which I don't like that either. But I would be interested to know what fairy tales C.S. Lewis read that he's so
I'm
enamored of them.
sure there's some book where it talks about that.
Okay.
All right, next slide. So we're at the end. I don't know why I did that. It jumped. Of the book, chapters 9 through 11. The first is called Counting the Cost. Next is New Nice People or New Men. And he does mean new people, not just men. And then the last chapter is The New Men. So my first question to the group, tell us about a time when you felt new, quote unquote, if there was.
Gosh, in a good way?
I hope so.
Well, you can be a newbie doing something and feel pretty uncertain,
Yeah,
out of your element.
true. Certainly. I'd say my first year of college, I felt like a totally out of my element, because I was totally out of my element. And I did have a roommate that I knew, and he was my roommate. Of course, we learned a lot about each other, living with each other. So it was like a whole new environment. And it was exciting. I don't remember it as being bad.
The day I got married.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. The whole situation changed.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good one.
I think when my first job, you know, I had all the information, but oh my gosh, I didn't have, you know, a clue. And it wasn't, you know, until, you know, some time when I felt comfortable. But yeah, I was new. Green.
Weren't there a couple of kids you knew from youth group who went by one name all through high school and middle school, and then when you talked to them after college for a year or two, they went by a different name? I forget. Was
Yeah.
it Sam? What, Samantha or?
Samantha, yeah, she went by Lee. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So you're even what you call yourself can be a transformation when you, especially when you're starting something that you're really stretching your wings, I guess.
4th grade, I dropped Louise. It was Mary Louise.
Yeah. Yeah. I only call her that if I'm kind of mad at her now, which is never. Okay, book 4, chapter 9, counting the cost. I only have 2 slides here because the next 2 chapters are a little more meaty. So let's recall the section last time when we discussed being perfect. Jesus said, you must become perfect as my Father is perfect. Jesus says, according to Lewis, and he's paraphrasing what Christ said, make no mistake, if you let me, Jesus, I will make you perfect. The moment you put yourself in my hands, that is what you are in for. Whatever suffering it may cost in your earthly life, whatever inconceivable purification it may cost after death, whatever it costs me, I will never rest nor let you rest until you are literally perfect. Okay, class, what does that mean?
It means my head hurts just trying to think about it.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Inconceivable purification it may cost after death.
I know
What does-
that bothers me.
Did he believe in a purgatory as the Catholics believe in, that you're still working out your salvation after that?
It brings to mind the obstinate toy soldier thing. As just a toy soldier just going through the motions, you're very imperfect. And compared to the toy soldier, a living person is perfect. I mean, so he might be using language to emphasize extreme transformation. And I think Jesus had high expectations for the disciples, and they almost never met those, right? You couldn't even pray with me 1 hour, right? When he went off. So it's about
they betrayed Christ.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's
I got a
impossible to be perfect.
Yeah, it's impossible to be perfect. Yeah, I think it's impossible to be perfect in our own steam. And there's where you hear people say, but with God, nothing is impossible. So he's definitely hinting at something kind of beyond us. He says, you must realize from the outset that the goal towards which God is beginning to guide you is absolute perfection. No power in the universe except yourself can prevent him from taking you to that goal. God, quote, is forcing us up to a higher level, putting us into a situation where we, quote, have to be very much braver or more patient or more loving than we dreamed possible. We may think this unnecessary, but, quote, that is because we have not yet had the slightest notion of the tremendous thing he means to make of us.
These are all very big thoughts.
Yes, they are. I almost think it's like when we have expectations about our 3 or 4 year old, and we just see the potential there. This is just my opinion. I'm trying to draw an analogy. We can't really tell that 4-year-old what our idea is of that potential, but we can talk to that 4-year-old knowing they have that potential, knowing that they're going to be perfect compared to just being a small child. No analogy is perfect, and I think this idea of perfection is a tough one.
Let me ask you, Tom, being a real student of
C.S. Lewis. There is an argument that I hear fairly frequently about God's will for us, and God's will for us as we seek God and as we seek to live as he would have us live. And the phrase is, and I'm sure you recall that I've probably said it before, he doesn't expect perfection, he expects persistence. It isn't like he sets us up to fail or expects us to fail. He recognizes our humanity and that we are imperfect creatures. And so this idea of perfection, as C.S. Lewis presents it, kind of makes me think, in a way, I want to hang on to this idea that God doesn't expect me to be perfect. He expects me to always keep trying.
Yes.
And
I was going to say, that reminds me of a conference we went to a number of years ago with high school kids. The conference theme was perfectly
Imperfect.
Perfectly imperfect.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever watch a movie where some young couple, It's a Wonderful Life, right? They had this house that's falling apart. Lots of movies have this theme. And one of the two spouses is going, this is just terrible. I'm really sorry. You know, I expected to be more than this. And then the other spouse says, it's perfect.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a suggestion there of it's our will to make it perfect, even though you know it's not. Does that make any sense?
I'm hearing yes, and I'm hearing a bit of humility with offering yourself to God to do with me what you will, so that I'm not the stumbling block that keeps God from doing what God's going to do. You know, because it said, no power in the universe except yourself can prevent him from taking you to that goal. And I think sometimes we are the stumbling block that keeps God from having a hand and having free reign. And I'll shut up.
Alice?
No, don't shut up, Mary. You have great things to add. But when you said that, Tom, about It's a Wonderful Life, I thought about how we could really examine that movie in a way that Mary, the wife, was God-filled. She had faith that was unwavering. She said, oh, it's a perfect house. It doesn't matter. But what was his name? George Bailey. He was constantly searching, right? He wanted to go travel the world. He wanted to get out of that little town. He didn't want to be part of any of it, but he kept hitting these roadblocks. And it's kind of, we could really do a exploration on that movie as, you know, the person with faith, the person searching, the person who doesn't see how great life is. And, you know, I don't know, that just hit me when you guys started talking about that. Because George was unhappy, always looking for the next thing, the better thing. And it was right under his nose, right?
Right. With his kids, with his wife, with the town.
Right. The bank, the people that loved him and that he helped, the small community that he, you know, fostered, all of that. Yeah, it's kind of a neat thought. It just came to my brain. He
kept thinking it wasn't good enough. And he even kept thinking it wasn't good enough for Mary. And Mary, the whole movie said, it is good enough. This is perfect. Look at you. Look at these kids you have. What do you want? And maybe God's talking to us like that. Maybe.
Well, and I think that last line, that is because we have not yet had the slightest notion of the tremendous thing he means to make of us. And I think sometimes that's right in front of us, the tremendous thing that is to our benefit, to our happiness, to our joy, and we just kind of miss it.
Well, I think Lucy captured it last week. Were you here, Lucy, last week?
I think so.
Yeah, but you made this great comment about how all of us in our age right now are able to really see more clearly where God sits in our life. When you're in your 20s and 30s, you're just all about ourselves and all about what we want and our egos and blah, blah, blah. But as we age, we kind of get clarity on,
Yep.
Perspective.
yeah.
Yeah. I think that's really important. The other day I told Lulu, I said, you could grow up to be an astronaut. We were talking about space and gravity and stuff like that. And she goes, can I be a mommy too? And I said, yeah. Sure.
Yep.
But she
And the other
could
thing
fathom both of them.
the other thing that I'll just contribute, and we're going to move on, is this idea that Christ can be in us, that we have this Zoe. That's something that it's hard for me. It's been hard for me to figure that out, because there's a lot of cryptic language in New Testament about I'll abide in Christ, Christ will abide in me. But that perfection in me can be Christ. That's Christ's doing. And I think Louis is going to talk more about that. So there's also that. There's what your perception of perfection is, and then there's also God is doing a work in you, in us. Book chapter 10 is nice people or new men. Lewis says, if we want to compare Christians and non-Christians, we cannot use vague generalities of two groups. We must think of real people that we have met, that we know. The question becomes, what can Christianity do for Dick Firkin? These are just names he used in there. And Dick Firkin was unbelieving, but he was a nice guy. Or Miss Bates. She was a believer, but she's kind of nasty. Can they become something different, and how? So this idea that, well, I'm a Christian, I'm a religious person because I just want to become a nicer person. And C.S. Lewis said, not so much. Lewis thinks evaluation on the basis of niceness may be a mistake. Actually, he said it's definitely a mistake. In God's eyes, Dick Firkin needs saving every bit as much as Miss Bates. What's your comment about that? Or do you have?
I don't like the word nice.
Yeah.
To me, it sounds superficial.
Yes. Kind is a little deeper to me.
Yes.
But I like that he said they both need saving, and for us to fall into the trap of judging people by their behaviors, which we are often inclined to do because they say or do stupid things, we do the same thing ourselves. And that we all need that saving. I found this chapter very interesting. I have to go back and read it again. Because we want our kids to be around good people, nice people.
Yeah. I mean, that's a goal, but I think as the yardstick for who we might become, niceness is insufficient. I believe C.S. Lewis would say. That is, that we can measure each other. We can think of scales of niceness, nice house, nice person, nice job, whatever. But that is missing the point. If we think by our own efforts, however nice we make our life, that's the end goal. I think Lewis is saying that can't be the end goal.
Well, I think in saying, comparing Christians with non-Christians, what is he saying about non-Christians? There's lots of really nice, good, kind, whatever the word is, non-Christians in the world.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And I like what he said about this, because in our culture nowadays, almost anything you read, it's about groups. This group is like that. That group is like that. Lewis says that's not a very good way to evaluate someone's religion. You need to know them. And Jesus was like this. Jesus had 12 disciples. Jesus didn't look for 1,000 people to create a political action organization or something to carry on his ministry. He created one-on-one relationships, because that is really the only way you can know somebody. And I think that's an important principle.
I don't remember which one of you said it a minute ago as a substitute for nice. I think you said kind. Was it Mary? Someone
Mm-hmm.
said kind.
It's a lot
If
better
I-
word.
Say again?
That's a lot better word.
I think so.
It's a better 4-letter word than some I've heard.
Yes, yes. And interestingly, one of our friends here tonight might be willing to back me up on this. In another language, kind is frequently translated as gentil.
Correct.
Gentil, which in English sounds a whole lot like
Gentile
Gentle.
gentle,
and Gentile.
gentle, gentil. And one of the, to me, and I guess I'm revealing something about me, I would rather be thought of as being kind than probably anything else.
Yeah.
Because I feel like if I'm kind, if I'm really kind, then I'm beginning to treat people the way I want to be treated. I want people to be kind to me. And so when I'm sorry, I can't remember who said it, but when I think to me, that's what perfection is. If we become kind.
Ultimate kindness. And you certainly remember people in your life who are kind to you. I do. I will never forget.
Absolutely.
Because of their kindness. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like you. Lewis goes on about this idea. It cost God nothing, so far as we know, to create nice things, but to convert rebellious wills cost his crucifixion. And because they are wills, they can refuse his request. Nice people just as much as nasty ones. They're in the same boat. It is when Dick realizes his niceness is not his own, but a gift from God. And when he offers it back to God, it is just then that it begins to be really his own. For now, Dick is beginning to take a share in his own creation.
I like that.
Any other thoughts about that? Is being nice different from what Lewis described?
I don't think in that sense. I think that Dick would realize that there's more depth if he realizes it's a gift from God. I think it would go further into his psyche and become kind. Because at some point you have to be outward with that gift.
Yeah.
Not just pleasing to yourself, but benefiting to others.
Yeah.
How does Dick offer niceness back to God? How does one do that? Any of us?
I know. Well, let me take a stab. By being nice even to your enemies, by being nice and having other people's well-being at heart, even when you don't like them, or it doesn't help you with your competitive advantage in our world. I think when you know the spirit in you, that spirit of love and niceness in you comes from God, I think he's saying you have a different obligation about it. And niceness isn't the end isn't the goal. It's knowing God. It's trying to get that good infection from God is the goal, and it makes you nice.
Mm-hmm.
So don't mistake a symptom or a measure for the goal.
This might be a stretch, but I'm thinking of an analogy or a definition of niceness to expand on it would be the fruits of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, patience, gentleness, goodness, meekness, temperance, all those things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, you can be nice outwardly. You can have enmity for someone, and you can still act nice, and they'll think you're nice, but you've missed the boat. You've created a facade of niceness that has nothing undergirding it, right? And so that would not be a fruit of the Spirit. Fruit of the Spirit is what underlies who you are.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the power of the word kind.
Yeah.
And so
Well, go ahead.
I think it's acknowledging that it's not anything of your doing. And, Dick might think, oh man, I'm so good. I'm nice, that it's his own doing. And if we think of all the stuff as that we have or who we are is from God, then it isn't really our own doing. It's just acknowledging that God has given that to us. And then like he says, it really does become his own.
And that part made me uncomfortable too, because I really think I have a part in my kindness. So there's no language that's perfect for this. So, but we still need to know the source from where the love ultimately comes from. And Luce is going to talk about this in the next slide. If we pat ourselves on our own back even for our own kindness, you start to enter the pride. Remember we talked about pride. You start to enter this thing where you start to feel superior. I bet I've had this conversation where I talk about how much kinder I was than someone else. Using it as some kind of measuring stick, and I think that means you're starting to get off the rail. Does that make any sense?
Mm-hmm.
You do have your own.
I think you're puffing yourself up when ultimately it should be, oh, maybe I should be doing a little more humility here. And
even with regard to the virtues, you can do that. Oh, everyone loves me, right? Love is a virtue. Everyone loves me. They ought to. Look how great I am. All right.
Well, that's true, Tom. That is true.
No. The next slide is talking about our deficit, where he talks about the poor. So this is kind of the flip side. Christ said, "Blessed are the poor," and how hard it is for the rich to enter the kingdom. And Lewis thinks this is not limited to material wealth. And this is where we have to watch out how we see our own self, where we see our assets coming from. If everything seems to come simply by signing a check, if you're wealthy, you may forget that you are at every moment totally dependent on God. Likewise, natural gifts carry with them a similar danger. If you have sound nerves and intelligence and health and popularity and a good upbringing, you are quite likely to be quite satisfied with your character as it is. Why drag God into it, quote unquote?
Dog has
my words exactly. I think it's not extending yourself. I think you're in a place of complacency and isolation when you limit yourself that way. Instead of being a healthy risk taker, not in bad behaviors, but in extending yourself so that you're in an uncomfortable position. Does that make sense? I don't think
there's some places. There's places where Lewis talks about sometimes the nasty person has the advantage because his world's going to fall apart, right? It's Richard Rohr. What is it? Falling up. falling up. It's sometimes the person who's reaching the bottom of their end of their rope or the bottom of the barrel is the one who finally understands their dependence on God. And so that's kind of the flip side of this. If you got it all worked out, you think you have everything sort of nailed, then you forget about God. And I think Jesus talked about this, and Lewis is emphasizing it. That could be a dangerous situation too.
And it's interesting, the whole sentence about if you have sound nerves and intelligence and so on, you are likely to be quite satisfied. Now, I think there's a lot of people that have all of those things and they're not satisfied. I look at this whole blessed are the poor because they have so much discovery to be part of and so much learning and growing. And that's why they have a better time than those who think they got it all figured out.
Yeah.
That's how I see these statements.
Yeah.
Like a child compared to an adult. Children are imaginative and creative and wondering and fearless. And so they gather and they inspect and they examine and they think and they question. But if you're hardened as an adult, you forget all that. You forget the natural wonders that are given to you.
Yeah.
I think you kind of get out of being happy with simple things or grateful for what you have around you. You become so hardened in having it that you're not grateful for it.
Jesus clearly had, if he had a favor, if he showed any favoritism, it was for the lowly, for those who were downtrodden and oppressed, and they seemed to understand Jesus better than the religious leaders of the time.
They had more to gain from being with Jesus and listening to him and trying to follow him.
Yeah. If you're a nice person, if virtue comes easily to you, beware. Much is expected from those to whom much has been given. If you mistake for your own merits what are really God's gifts to you through nature, and if you're contented with simply being nice, you're still a rebel, Lewis said.
The Oxford definition of nice, I looked it up, is pleasant. The word pleasant. Pleasant.
Yeah, indigestion can mess that up.
Yeah. It's just kind of like there's no highs and lows. It's almost like you have no passion.
Yeah, right.
And I think that, being a Christian is being passionate for your faith in a loving God and passionate for sharing that with others. And that comes in a variety of ways. It's not just one way. And knowing you need to have God in your life, that you are going to make mistakes. One of the things in this chapter I was reading about will. The question whether the natures offer or withheld are at that moment nice or nasty is of secondary importance, because the God is asking us, will we give our wills to God? And I remember talking to kids a lot about their willingness. I appreciated their willingness to step out on a limb, to do different things that would put them in a situation of uncertainty, not of hurt, but they were going to have to befriend other people they didn't know, or go on a mission trip, or work in an area. And really, they had to be willing to do that. And they didn't know. I couldn't tell them how it was all going to work out. but give them enough information to offer themselves. And I appreciated reading that in this chapter, because it isn't easy for any of us to do things that are uncomfortable.
You need to be all in. This idea of me trying to make my will in sync with God's means I'm willing to give up my pride, my maybe some of the things I thought were the most important goals. I think another imperfect but somewhat okay analogy is a marriage. When you get married to someone, you are joining your will in a certain sense with that of another person. You're no longer making decisions just on your own, or ideally. I mean, everyone makes mistakes, but if you don't win with that mindset, then I think marriages can be real difficult. That imperfect analogy, but that is one.
That's a good analogy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we all know there is no perfect marriage.
Right. You have to work at it all the time. You have to, when you start, people grow apart. You ever hear, oh, well, we just grew apart. Well, you have to work to not grow apart. That's an act of the will. And it's likewise with God. I think every day you have to say, well, how can I try and understand God's meaning today for whatever I'm going to encounter?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, moving on to new men. So this is the same basic topic. And this is the last chapter. So who are we becoming? And so Lewis talked about evolution. And so he had a lot in there about evolution, how evolution is really not contrary to what Christians believe. He says, we became supreme on earth, we humans, because of our human brain. Lewis called this a break from evolution based on size and strength. I mean, animals got to the top of the pecking order because of their size and strength and survival of the fittest. So Lewis is asked, and so these humans, relatively frail things but had a brain, was kind of a different kind. And so Lewis asked, well, what's the next step if we're going to use evolution as sort of an idea? Are we even going to become brainier beings or something of a new kind? And he says the Christian view of something new is we're creatures of God, and we're creatures of God, we become sons of God and daughters and children. This doesn't just happen, but is voluntary. It's offered and we can refuse. Do you agree? Why or why not? I know, tough question. Yeah, speaking for myself, I do think we spend our 60, 70, 80 years in life on this earth becoming something better. Otherwise, it'd be like Nietzsche and the nihilists. It's just all for nothing. What's the point? I choose to believe that all of our lives have a point. And that point isn't just to get up to a certain point of wisdom and progress, and then it's nothing after that. So what is this next thing? And Lewis thinks it's this Zoe, that we are being prepared for the next thing. Do you agree?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. It bothers me that we can refuse, and yet God is going to still hound us, come after us.
Right.
And so I'm, will we seal our fate and go to hell and be separated from God forever if God loves us so much and we are God's child? Can we do that to ourselves?
And is there ever a point where we can't choose again, where we can't choose? That's, by the way, that we could do the Great Divorce. That book's all about that. Great Divorce is the separation of heaven and hell that Lewis wrote. So that's another one we could put on the shelf. But so he explores that idea a lot. And Lewis says, if there's even the slightest glowing ember of you left in you, now or in the next life, God can blow on it, and he can bring it to life. But we still have a part in it. That's our free
Seems a
will.
little paradoxical that we could refuse God, but God still gets us. To hold those, that I could refuse God, but God says, no, I'm going to still get you. Hold those.
What about a parent who has an endlessly rebellious kid and the parent never gives up on him? Sometimes the kid never comes back into the fold, but the parent always, a good parent, always holds that out that child can come back.
Yep.
And it can be really hard and a lot of pain.
Mm-hmm.
Lewis says Jesus Christ is the first instance of the new man. Not just a new man, but the new man. The origin and center of life, the origin and center and life of all the new men. God's own will bringing Zoe, a new spiritual life, to anyone who wants it. Everyone who gets it by personal contact with him. People become new by being in him. I didn't know how to ask a question for this, so I just said comments.
I like what Lucy said earlier about the, I forget the word, but all the all the good things.
Fruits of the Spirit.
Yes. That's how we get to become new, because to me, that's makes sense. When we are conducting those in ourselves, then we are working on becoming new and being in him. That seems pretty straightforward and pretty easy, but it's not easy, obviously, because it's not, because life gets in the way and whatnot.
And we have the gift of being able to help each other. In fact, that's exactly what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to see all of us as in the same boat. Hopefully, remember the image of the getting on a ship, going to the ocean, and having a map. And so we're all on this voyage, and we have obligations to each other, I think. On this view, according to Lewis, the thing has happened. The new step has been taken and is being taken. New beings are dotted all over the earth. Some hardly recognizable. Others stand out and can be recognized. Faces and voices different from ours. Stronger, quieter, happier, more radiant. They begin where most of us leave off. They will not be very like the idea of, quote, religious people, unquote, which you have formed from your general reading. So religion in the Christian sense isn't what people usually think of as religion, which they usually think of religion, well, I'm going to follow this set of rules and I'm going to become a nicer person. And Lewis says no. How does this idea comport with your conception of Christianity?
Define comport, Tom.
Be in sync with. I was struck. I picked this to put on there because, in my opinion, the people I knew who had a strong Christian faith, some ministers I knew, just people I become friends with, Mary, they just have this quality, especially the quieter, happier. They just have this. I don't know. It's a confidence that doesn't come from their money, doesn't come from their flouting their status, their own status, or something like that. It's just ingrained. Do you know people like that? And it draws me to them.
Yeah, I just see God is with these big arms, just trying to reach out and just gather everyone to God's self. And there's some people ducking, because they're just unsure of that closeness and that, to one another or even to themselves. And that they're harming themselves when they resist, but they don't know it. And so there's just needs to be some softening from others as they struggle with it, and that we can't assume that we know all of what God is going to have in store for us either, and be smug about it. But to, reach out our hands, even though we're coming into this big, hug, reach out your hand and grab them. It's just an image that just kind of came into my head. It was, I hate that we always talk about youth group, but that was a huge part of our lives. And we had so many kids from different high schools, different middle schools, and they didn't know one another. Just because the parents came to church didn't mean that the kids were going to like being at church or like being around these kids that they didn't have classes with or know or anything. And it was really a time for them to get to know one another. And lots of kids said yes, but then lots of kids said no. And I took it as a personal affront when they said no, because I thought, can't you see, can't you see that this is going to be a good thing? It'll be what you bring to it. And it will add to you, and you will add to the others who are there. And I had to tell myself that they're going to find God somewhere else. And so that I didn't, it was always an invitation, always open, always welcoming, always encouraging. But there were some who would say no.
Well, I think some people don't understand unconditional love. And that's what God provides, right? That's what we're taught. Some people are raised in a way that they don't trust that. They don't understand it. They can't conceptualize it.
Yeah.
Because they've never known it. And it's very sad, but that's why church communities and communities in general that reach out and have groups and book clubs and potlucks at services and all of it, that's how those people get pulled into the fold.
Mm-hmm.
But it's real. Some people don't get it. They don't say, oh, how could this being love me? I'm flawed. And,
Right.
It's a big deal.
Mm-hmm. It truly is.
Do you have to be calling yourself a Christian to be living a Christian life? Is that title so important for people?
No, I mean, the people that followed Christ didn't call themselves Christians. I think that title was applied decades, if not a century after Christ, they were known as people of the way. The early Christians were people of the way. And I think I had a slide in here that talked about killing again. You have to kill your natural self. And Lewis does this in some of his other writings. It's part of the rhythm of nature that things die and are reborn. And a lot of the nature religions, a lot of other religions Lewis studied, are the corn king, the dying god who is reborn, like the phoenix. And he says they all have this idea that's correct, that there's something in our natural self, our competitiveness, our desire to get to the top of the pecking order. There's these things that we have to kill in ourselves in order to be reborn. I didn't like the language of that, so I think I deleted those slides. But that was in this chapter and the last chapter. And so he says to become new men means losing what we now call ourselves. Out of ourselves into Christ we must go. His will is to become ours, and we are to think his thoughts, to have the mind of Christ, as the Bible says. And you can't do that if you're crowding your whole being with what you want, with your own ambition. Does that make any sense? And there's so many things that he said, and some of it's a little uncomfortable. It's like being the toy soldier. Yeah.
If you read Richard Rohr, you'll hear the echoes of the false self and the true self.
Yeah. All right, let me go to the next one. It says, until you have given yourself up to him, you will not have a real self. Sameness is found among the most natural men, not among those who surrender to Christ. Because he was criticized with this, thinking, well, you're not going to have your own self, then everyone's going to be just like, and all Christians are just this big group of people that look like all these little Christs running around being like Christ. He's saying, no, it's paradoxical. He said the sameness is found most among the natural men, not among those who surrender to Christ. He says, how monotonously alike all the great tyrants and conquerors have been. How gloriously different are the saints. Christ will give you a real personality. The more I resist him, the more I become dominated by my own heredity, upbringing, surroundings, natural ideas. And I abbreviated that. That was a longer thing. What I so proudly call myself becomes merely the meeting place for trains of events which I never started and I cannot stop. So I think about people who become overly defined by their occupation or by some obsession they have, and that defines them and maybe takes you away from finding yourself in Christ. And it just reminded me of the obstinate toy soldier chapter.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Last slide. You will never make a good impression on other people until and he's talking about our tendency, our nature to want to impress other people. And you end up thinking about your own image more than being yourself. So he says, you'll never make a good impression on other people until you stop thinking about what sort of impression you're making. No artist who bothers about originality will ever be original. If one simply tries to tell the truth in his art, one finds a more clear path to be original. Give up yourself and you will find your real self. Lose your life and you'll save it. Submit to death of your ambitions and favorite wishes every day. Submit with every fiber of your being and you will find eternal life. Keep back nothing, for nothing that you have not given away will be really yours. Nothing that has not died will ever be raised from the dead.
Mm.
There's a lot there. Does that make you think? It's
Sometimes
harsh language.
it sounds quite paradoxical again, because how can you go through life without having some ambition, without some drive, and still not have it be all consuming and acknowledge that you don't have some role in that ambition, that work that you're doing, that drive that gets you up every morning. And still be yourself, still be your own individual self that God has created you to be.
I think he wants you to do that, Mary, and I think he wants us to do that. He just wants to be a part of it. He wants us to call on him every morning before we start the day and say, would you walk along with me as I pursue these things that I think you want me to do? I mean, there's no doubt that what you and Tom, in my mind anyway, there's no doubt that what you and Tom did in Virginia was what he called you to do. And you were heavily invested in it. And you left wonderful marks on a whole lot of people. And so the drive that you had and the pain you suffered, the struggles that you endured, I think were in his name. You said that when you talked about the child that didn't want to, embrace it. And you said, but he'll find God in some other way.
Mm-hmm.
And that, to me, that's the graceful recognition.
Well, I wasn't always graceful.
Well, and probably not always kind.
No.
Lewis is also trying to interpret the things Jesus said. Like Jesus said, the first shall be last. He said, unless you lose your life for my sake, you will never find me. That was a poor quote, but there's a number of statements like that Jesus said, and his disciples kind of looked at him and said, "What?" Kind of like we are, in this harsh language. I read a commentary of Mere Christianity, and this author said, "This transformation into a new creation looks, if one takes example of evolution, to be of a new kind. But this is a good example of where Lewis missed the boat, missed an opportunity in a way. This new kind, this Zoe, is actually the original kind. Reality as it was originally and it was meant to be." So we do have, I think he's addressing your criticism here. We do have something genuine in us that we're trying to find. So no, we're not killing everything that we are. We are being like that, like the transformation nature of a larva that becomes a butterfly. We are becoming that true thing we meant to be.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like melding those two together. The original us that God has created, and the giving that right back to God, so that it's a whole.
Yeah.
Self.
All right. Anything else? I know that was a thick chapter. Well, it was a conclusion. So Lewis really tried to tie loose ends together, and there's a lot of ends that I've had to read this book 3 or 4 times still, and I can draw some comparisons with my own life in some ways I can't. And remember, Lewis said, if this does you good, fine. If it doesn't, forget it. And he's trying to, in a lot of ways, when you're talking about God, you're trying to describe the indescribable. And I think it's useful to remember that.
Yeah.
my last slide says, this one's going to be really tough. If I can get to it. Comments or questions about anything from Mere Christianity? Next, me? Question mark?
Well, I wondered, he said he was an atheist for many, many years, this gentleman. And then all of a sudden he's doing radio talks about Christianity. And so does he attribute any resources or any other scholars or religious leaders to some of the words and writings, all of this book? Does he give any credit to anyone else for the words and the things, the concepts he puts in this book? Or is it all from his mind?
He was a student of the classics. So he writes about Plato, Saint Augustine, Socrates, but more to his contemporaries. George MacDonald was a Scottish minister, and he credits George MacDonald with developing his imagination, because MacDonald wrote fantasy stories, children's stories, and novels, and he was a minister. And he wasn't really a minister in that great of a standing in the Church of Scotland, because he was tending towards being a universalist. He did not like the exclusivity the church was getting to be. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He was leaving it open that people in other religions find Christ. It's just they don't use that word. They see Christ and God in a different way. But anyways, so Lewis, I think, read everything MacDonald wrote, and also G.K. Chesterton. He talks a lot about, and all the Inklings. His conversion to Christianity had a lot to do with people like Tolkien, and the person at the beginning, Lucy's uncle. Oh, I forget.
Alice, that's a wonderful question.
Owen Barfield. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I was going to ask it the other way around, a little tighter maybe. Does in your mind, Tom, does C.S. Lewis say that this person or that person were my primary mentors?
Yes, he says that of MacDonald. And he also felt like God was pursuing him. Someone said that earlier tonight. He said, the more I tried to disprove God and I decided, it's all bunk, and he kind of ended it for himself, the more and these little doubts crept in, the more he'd meet someone with some quality he couldn't quite identify. And a lot of these people were in the church or writers like Tolkien. Yeah, so there's a ton of people influenced him.
And to address your question about atheism, I mean, he had a hard growing up life, right? And then
Yes.
he went through the war, and there's this paragraph in Nice People or New Men. It says, but if you are a poor creature, and he outlines, poisoned by a wretched upbringing and some house full of vulgar jealousies and senseless quarrel, saddled by no choice of your own with some loathsome, and he says sexual perversion, I will just say some perversion, nagged day in and day out by an inferiority complex that makes you snap at your best friends, do not despair. That when you decide to make this change in your life, that it's not going to happen like that. It's going to be a process. You've gotten to this point so far, and so it's going to take this process. So it happened it seems to have happened for C.S. Lewis like that. He took a train, one way, and it changed his mind, but he had been working at it for a long time. And I think that in this paragraph, it says, do what you can, start your process. And if you fail, start it again,
And all God expects, and all God expects is that you try, and God does not expect you to get it all at once, and you're never going to be alone. And Lewis was convinced God never left him alone. Even when his wife died, he wrote this book called A Grief Observed. He chronicled the pain and grief of going through the death of his wife. And he lamented. Sometimes it seemed like God was not around at all. But he said he was. That his feelings let him mistake his feelings for what his will and his faith was. If that makes sense. Yeah, he had a really hard life. And of course, he didn't get married till he was in his 50s. And then that marriage only lasted about 4 years, and she died. Yeah, good questions. So thank you all for participating, and
Thank you, Tom.
I'd be happy to do something like this again,
Well
or
done.
someone else. If you have a book you really love, I just put paragraphs and slides, and hope everyone reads the book and just talk about it.
Wonderful
Thank you so
format.
much.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah,
Thank you,
thanks.
Tom.
Thank you so
You're
much,
welcome.
Tom. I mean, this was a lot. This took a lot of time on your part.
Yeah,
And
labor of love.
but it was really fabulous. It really was.
He
Thank you.
Great
he
job.
can sit and be focused on that. And I'm like, a million places.
It makes me think. It makes me take the book apart piece by piece, which
Oh,
planner. That's what I used to do. And just, I mean, I started with 20 slides and I got it down to about 14. It's fun to see things and see what seems important to me, but I like to hear what's important to everyone else too.
And I think this format on doing it on Zoom, of course, I understand how we got where we are, but I think this is really good too. I think it's really been a really good way. I mean, I've got this. You've got the slide right here. I can see it. Nobody's head is in the way or anything else. It's easy to read, and I can. And I just don't think you would have that if we were at the church.
we'd have to set up a huge projector. Oh, Lord. And then you got technology problems.
And I wouldn't be able to
Right,
be
Alice?
there.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Couldn't be here. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
So we got,
Lucy, are you down in DC right now?
I'm in Mentone.
Oh, okay.
All right. That's right. We saw you.
That's right.
yeah. But I
Yesterday,
mean,
today.
Alice, look, you'd have to drive in and then drive back, and no.
It's
You
20
have to
minutes.
drive all the way from Georgia, all the way that.
But it would be late.
Yes.
It'd be late. It'd be dark.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, this is good.
Right.